Welcome to another in the series of Idea Collider, which is a collection of interviews with authors of some of my favorite books, especially as it pertains to innovation. And I'm delighted to welcome Lee Vinsel and Andrew Russell to the podcast, authors of The Innovation Delusion, which was already an interestingly provocative title. So Andrew, Lee, delighted to welcome you to the podcast. First time we've ever had two authors on here, so I'm hoping Zoom deals with the kind of technicalities of showing your faces while you're talking. Maybe Andrew, Lee, if you could give us something about you, how you got here, how you came to write the book, to kick us off. Andrew.
Yeah, I can start. So first, thanks for having us on. We're really excited to be here and spend a little bit of time chatting with you. My name is Andy Russell. I am Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at SUNY Polytechnic Institute. We have campuses in Utica and in Albany, New York. I'm a historian by training. History of technology is my field, and it gets more specific from there. History of computing. I wrote my dissertation on standardization in telecom and IT networks. And yeah, that's the short version. I'll turn it over to Lee, and then we can tell you a little bit more about the book and our collaboration.
Yeah, my name is Lee Vinsel. I'm an assistant professor of science, technology, and society at Virginia Tech. And like Andy, I am a historian of technology by training. And like Andy, also, I'm a historian of standardization. So my first book is about the history of automobile standards and the relationship between government and technological change via standards. The way we got into writing the book is Andy made a joke. So about 6 years ago now, Walter Isaacson published the book, The Innovators, How Hackers, Geniuses, and Geeks Created the Digital Revolution. And Andy wrote me and a buddy and said we should answer it with a counter volume that would be called The Maintainers, How Bureaucrats, Standards Engineers, and Introverts Create Technologies that Work Most of the Time. And we started playing with that on Twitter and via blog posts, and it just kind of took off and took on a life of its own. People in our field started telling us we should hold a conference on the topic. And then we wrote an essay called Hail the Maintainers, which is on Eon. And that came out the same day as our first Maintainers Conference, which is called The Maintainers. And it took off even more from there. So it kind of went viral and got picked up by The Guardian, Le Monde, Atlantic, and all these different places. And so, then we got approached to do more with it. And one of the things is to write this book. In which we kind of try to articulate both a critique of what we call innovation speak and point to some of the problems that innovation speak causes.
Yeah, and to kind of dive into that theme, I think the first thing that you do in the book is to kind of unpack the definitions of innovation and what it is and what it isn't. So could you give us a flavor of kind of the main points there?
Yeah,
Sure,
go for it, Andy.
Okay, yeah. So, the first distinction that's really important is invention versus innovation, where invention is the creation of a new idea, and innovation is putting it to use, usually in a complex context, and usually for profit in some manner. At least in the business world, that's what it means. Innovation means, and we're traditionalists in the sense that we follow Joseph Schumpeter's definition of innovation, which has been around for, it's got to be close to a century, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, that's not only focused on products, but also on processes and modes of organization and modes of promotion, everything that has to do with bringing an idea to profitable use in society. So innovation, as you know, is a big buzzword, and over the past few decades, there's been a pretty measurable rise in what we in the book called innovation speak, which is the way that professionals of all kinds talk about it, usually in the service of making money. So it's in many cases indistinguishable from marketing speak. And so the first big distinction that we make in the book is between actual innovation, the introduction of new things into the world for profit, for some sort of practical use, and innovation speak, which is all the hazy garbage around it, which sometimes helps and sometimes doesn't. So Lee, why don't you pick it up from there?
Well, I think that's like a helpful starting point. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've been kind of banging this drum, but so is everyone else, right? About the difference between invention and innovation, that they're not the same, that the originator needs 1,000 other people to, to get it to the point of value. But, you examine in the book that kind of, that mythology around the kind of genius or the inventor or innovator. I'm interested, why do you think it's so sticky, especially in America, this idea of, innovators being the genius individual, the Steve Jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that runs pretty deep in Western culture. I mean, it's the Industrial Revolution is really taking off in the 19th century as the same time as like Romanticism is happening in literature and art, and so there's, I think that at least since the 19th century, there's been a kind of genius author vision of the inventor as like this remarkable individual who brings things into the world. And in the States, it connects with I would not want to speak for other countries, but in the States, at least, it fits with other notions of individualism and kind of cowboy culture and these kinds of things that are very predominant. So, and it's also an easier story to tell, to do that like shining biography, or like we'll have another movie about Edison versus Tesla or something, like these remarkable geniuses, or there's Tony Stark, Iron Man, like these are simple stories to tell, like stories about industrial R&D and like hundreds of people who are involved in getting some small incremental change to market is much more complex and maybe boring. So I think that there's a bunch of like self-reinforcing reasons we end up where we are.
And I guess often told to us by those folks themselves. So Edison, Steve Jobs, I think they were classic marketers of their own,
Yeah.
Singular skill in bringing it to all of this stuff to us.
Absolutely.
And you talked a lot in that early phase about this kind of incrementalist vision, this kind of this ability of incrementalism to bring advantage to life. Could you explain a little bit on what you mean by incrementalism and the incrementalist vision?
Yeah, I think maybe the best way to start into that is to or how we start into it is from our backgrounds in the history of technology, where one of the core concepts is of the technological system. So it goes right along. If you want to debunk or kind of cleanse yourself of this myth of the individual lone genius, one of the first steps you'd want to take is to understand that any technology or anything really is a part of a system. So think more holistically. And once you understand that, whether it's for electric power or automobiles or telecommunications or pharmaceuticals for that matter, then you can really get a sense of how difficult it is to bring something wholly new into the world, because it just would take supplanting all of the pieces of the system and devising a whole new system that can support whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And I think once you understand that, then you see that the real possibilities for invention lie within systems, as opposed to ripping up a system that has roots in business and in government and in labs and in human resources and in law, everywhere. And so it's just an empirical point, I think, that we've come to understand from history, from looking at all these different systems. And I think it plays out today. We can see it in any number of industries, but certainly when we talk to professionals as well, that's really where the rubber meets the road. That tends to be what they're working on when they're working on innovation. It's how to improve a small process or introduce something new into an existing framework.
And it's interesting because I think you do ask that question about whether innovation automatically equals progress. And as you said, it's because it's often about profit. The two things don't necessarily, sit together that way.
Yeah, certainly not on the social level. One of the jokes we've made for a long time is, according to very strict definitions of innovation, crack cocaine was a major innovation in the United States in the 1980s. It just means bringing something new to market, and it doesn't really kind of touch on the question of whether it's actually valuable or not.
Hmm.
And of course, the question of whether something is actually valuable or not is a judgment call, and it really is going to depend on who you are. I can say an addictive video game is not like a value, according to my values, but like, some hardcore gamer would disagree with me and call me a snob or something. So it gets pretty complicated when you get into that side of, values and those judgments.
Yeah, and that interlacing of innovation is automatically good, as you say. It's like oxycodone
Yeah.
or financial innovation within the space. It's all innovation, but whether it's good for us or not is a very valid question.
Yeah.
Maybe if you could expand on, because you use the word technology in the book, you kind of unpack that as well. That technology is not just digital, Silicon Valley stuff. Could you tell us a bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, this one really gets up my nose a little bit because of the predominance of the word tech everywhere, and it happened really suddenly, and everyone seems to think that tech just means software, digital devices, Silicon Valley, but technology has a very broad and really meaningful definition of all the things that humans use to attain their goals. Some of those things are material, so whether it's a pencil or a calculator or a shovel, for most of humankind, it's probably more like a shovel than a calculator. And but it can also mean ways of doing things. So technologies, could refer to routines or social orders as well. And so that first step of thinking really broadly about technology, we hope is a corrective to when people think of innovation, they immediately think of tech and they immediately think of the Silicon Valley model, which has pretty profound flaws in it, not only for innovation but also for technology more generally.
Yeah. I'd be interested in your views, especially with the kind of automotive history. I think that as you get into complexity and technological solutions there, I look at my car now and I think, well, I have no idea what this will look like in 10 years' time, or whether anyone will be interested in it, because so many of the systems are integrated, right? The crash detection and
Yeah.
lane departure warnings and so on. If one of those sensors breaks, I've got no idea what this looks like. So, you also talk about this kind of complexity and whether any of this is good for us.
Yeah, I mean, there was a pretty good report on National Public Radio here in the States, a year or two ago. I remember about like the costs of fixing these sensors. So, how many lives are going to be saved through, whatever crash avoidance systems versus like, now you own a car, especially if you're a poorer person buying a used car, and it can be thousands of dollars just to replace one of those sensors, and the car won't operate right unless it's working properly. So this is definitely true. I think, it has been an incremental process. Computers and sensors first, entered vehicles in the States, at least in the early 1980s. And it's been a very slow march as we've put more and more computers, more and more sensors into vehicles. But, then you end up in a place where you have very complex systems with lots of, dependencies and stuff. So, I mean, I think we see this everywhere in electronics and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I worry about. I think one of the problems that we experience has to do with cultures of reliability in companies that make software and people who design software versus different types of engineering and different types of businesses where failures come at a much higher cost. So whether it's civil engineering or certainly pharmaceuticals or healthcare, the cost of failure is much higher than if the app store is down for an hour, or Gmail's out, or Twitter's out, or whatever it might be. One of the genius of the moves of the people making software is that they've accustomed us to that sort of failure. So I just replaced my dishwasher, not because I thought a great new dishwasher was on the market, but because the logic board was shot. And I'd brought in the same thing, and to repair it would have been, I think, more than actually to buy a new one. So it's that sort of structural problem that I think you're finding in your vehicle. I think a lot of people are finding it in their vehicles. And so, I think Mark Andreessen said software eats the world, and he might have been thinking that was a positive thing, but I think that's one of the fears that we expose in the book, is that software style thinking is damaging products and damaging experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, and you draw that parallel between that kind of innovation speak and that kind of innovation mentality of fail fast, break things, which we have become accustomed to as part of the kind of design thinking ideology. But that, as you say, that doesn't work in situations where we need the things that are breaking.
Yeah, or we don't want to kill people. Yeah, kind of depends on how important the system is and where it fits in life.
Yeah. But you also point out the kind of irony of, those systems themselves, the kind of Amazon Web Services and the moderators of Facebook content, largely being nameless, faceless people who sit and maintain uptime.
Yeah. I mean, for a long time, and I don't think people understand this even today, for a long time, the most profitable part of Amazon has been Amazon Web Services. So it's their cloud services department, and they're just competing on quality of service and uptime, basically. So it's very boring, maintenance-centered work. And of course, that's not what Amazon's known for. That's not what Bezos gets a lot of press for. He's talking about space or whatever. But the really the core of the business is this much more mundane quality of service stuff. Yeah.
I think that's well understood in businesses. Like Lee said, that's what pays the salaries at Amazon. You could go through all the companies, Oracle, Netflix. We discuss in the book a little bit. But it does present some challenges for executives in the company, particularly when they're trying to market to a different sweet spot in the market. And it's because of the cultural cachet of innovation. They're not going to go out and say we have the best, most reliable network, or sometimes they do. Verizon markets in that way, but companies seem to just be attracted to saying we've got the new this or that, and so it puts people within companies in a really difficult spot. And I'm not 100% sure how to resolve that, but I think every industry has its own tricks for working through that.
Yeah, and certainly there are parallels in our industry between that kind of Samsung folding phone kind of idea and being first to market. Often first is not as good as the product that follows it, having done all of the work to get there. So sometimes speed is the enemy of proof within our space. I think you talk also about the kind of the prediction of resilience built into systems as we kind of accumulate, complexity in the system. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? This kind of future debt that we're incurring by ever greater more complexity.
I think this comes out most clearly in the U.S. case with infrastructure. So. We talk about this guy, Chuck Marohn of Strong Towns, and his writings about U.S. infrastructure policy. And the way it works here is that the federal government's happy to help. They will give localities money to build infrastructure, but the localities are then putting themselves on the hook for maintaining that infrastructure for forever, until you want to put that infrastructure to bed. And when you drill into like the tax bases of these various localities, they just don't have the money to do that. Like, it's not realistic. But the incentives are all wrong, right? The incentive is to take the money now to get the new thing. And the more we kind of research the book, we see this in lots of different aspects of life. It's not just the infrastructure policy. It's like adopting technological systems in organizations, whether it's businesses or government or whatever. And there's just not very good ways, like people are not in the habit of thinking about the long-term maintenance costs of that. So, if we think about like technological debt, I mean, that has a certain meaning already in software circles. But if we think about infrastructural technological debt and think about what we're putting ourselves on the hook for in the future, I think it drives some more realistic thinking about what we actually need. And yeah, so that's a big part of it.
Yeah. So that idea that, if you build a bridge, you kind of know that you're going to need to maintain that bridge until, we've got some clear examples recently where, that has led to, huge issues.
Yeah. We used to think that problem was just in the States, and then bridges started falling down in Italy and other places, and it turned out it's not just an American problem. Big infrastructure problems in Germany too. So
yeah, even German autobahns, which you'd imagine would be kind of like paragons of virtue in this regard, are failing, right? So
yeah.
So do you think that's just a human issue, is that we'd rather build or forget or ignore until we can't?
It's kind of a working hypothesis. I mean, we did, as Lee said, we did arrive at this recognition that's manifest in the structure of the book, that what we're describing as the innovation delusion, which is this tendency to just put all our chips on innovation to solve all of our problems without really understanding the breadth of the problems and how that won't work. We've already discussed examples of that at 3 different scales, or 2 different scales. At the societal scale, in the sense of infrastructure, at the meso scale in terms of business, and in individuals' lives, with the choices that we make with our own possessions, with my dishwasher, for example, or even in personal health. And so it's that connecting across the scales that we found to be a pretty compelling way to try and wrap these stories together. And then we're left with the question that you posed, which is, well, why? Is there something innate here, or is it a matter of incentives, or is it something cultural where Americans are terrible at it, but Germans aren't? It's a big question. In some senses, it's an empirical question, and we could ask people, we could find out. I wish there was more research on it. But we can also, through comparisons, I think, see aspects where some societies perform better than others on the level of infrastructure.
I think.
Sorry, Lee.
Yeah, there's we also know, I mean, there are some studies when it comes to, it's called discounting in the psychological literature. So like, are you willing to not get the benefit now and put it off down the road? There's been some cross-cultural studies, and for instance, people in the US perform worse on this test than people from South Korea, for instance. So there's some studies that suggest it's more cultural. And then, as Andy said, we have like the Japanese high-speed rail system, or like Dutch, ocean management technology that appears to be pretty well maintained. So then you can ask, like, what are the cultures of maintenance around those things that make them better at it?
Yeah, and really interesting. So could you tell us a little bit more about this? You introduced this idea of the maintenance mindset. So, could you give us a kind of primer on that?
Yeah, sure. So the maintenance mindset came from our real desire to make this book about something positive, and not just about exposing, an expose of all the follies of innovation speak. And so the way that we pull it together, there's 3 basic principles at the core of it. The first is that is the simple recognition that maintenance sustains success. And so no matter what walk of life you're in, no matter what enterprise you're thinking about, almost by definition, if you're succeeding at something, unless you devote some effort to keeping that going, you're not going to be successful very long. And so there's a lot of data to support this. In the book, we talk about companies that have that have compiled data for things like building compressors or chillers or air conditioners, and where maintenance costs a really small fraction of emergency replacement costs. So that's first. Maintenance sustains success. The second is that maintenance depends on culture and management. So it's linking in with some of these cultural discussions that we discussed before. And maintenance comes across sometimes as boring. And that's, I think, one reason we found that people who are effective at instilling cultures of maintenance link it to other values that are important to people. So we see a lot of this with sustainability, for example, environmental sustainability, where better maintenance means less waste, means very direct connections to less, pollution and other things. So, and then the third step the third principle in the maintenance mindset is that what do we have here? We have maintenance. You need to get the data, you need to get the culture, and then you need to keep at it. Basically, it requires constant care. So it's not a fix it and forget it sort of thing. You need to install it in routines. In some companies, they find that software is the best way to keep at it, because it reminds people to keep on these tasks, and it can automate it in some cases. And there's even creative or innovative ways to go about doing this, using new technologies, the sorts of technologies that we bump into when we hear all the buzzwords, whether it's artificial intelligence or predictive analytics or things like that. So put in the service of maintenance, they can be really effective.
Yeah. And you talk about the kind of status of maintainers within the, culturally, within companies, within organizations. Could you, tell us a little bit more about that, and why we might have been painting the wrong picture for a long time now?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to our discussion of why we celebrate innovators as kind of like lone geniuses. But we argue in the book that there's a kind of status hierarchy or even caste system around maintenance work, that some jobs are as pegged as being higher status than others, and maintenance jobs are often in that lower status position. And you can actually see this in the history of social scientific studies of what's called occupational prestige. So you just have people rank jobs, what's the highest prestige and what's the lowest, and maintenance jobs kind of come out at the bottom. So the reality then is that a lot of times the maintainers in organizations kind of don't get the airtime, the love, the status, and all these kinds of things. And as a result, they often feel undervalued. And one problem for that reason is kind of a high turnover rate amongst these people. So on an organizational level, when it comes to like cultures, as Andy was saying, in organizations, we're really arguing that people need to think more seriously about the maintainers in their organizations and find ways to make sure they feel recognized and valued for their important work. I mean, another place you see it, and I'm sure you would say this comes out in pharma in various ways too, but like when we seduce young people into being engineers through like hackathons and robot competitions and all this kind of innovative focused stuff. And then in reality, like 70 to 80% of engineers are going to work in operations and maintenance. They're going to be kind of like doing totally ordinary jobs, keeping organizations running. So, I mean, I think it's like, it's a bigger call in that there needs to be lots of places where we're kind of shifting the narrative about what people are going to do in their lives, including because I think it just does bad things to tell young people they're going to be innovators, and then they're like in the belly of some bureaucracy, like working on some standardization paperwork or something like that.
Yeah. And then you use a great example in the book of people wanting to help nurses, but focusing on the kind of glitz instead of the stuff that nurses do every day, and how often they were asked for what would help them every day. So clearly we have good examples of people who we trust a lot and care for a lot, but also not listening to their role in maintenance.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible actually how simple it would be in some senses just to ask people, what do you value? What would help you do your job? And to say out front, we're asking you this because we really recognize your importance and we want you to be successful. Very straightforward, and it was astonishing to us when we learned, how rare or infrequent that might be. So that would be a really simple way to help reverse some of the changes or some of the problems that Lee was just describing.
Yeah, and it feels like a societal good, right? I mean, you also talk in the book about how we kind of seem to value helping people get into STEM education and so forth, especially getting women into STEM. And then you point out the kind of disparities there between the numbers of roles that are available versus the number of roles that may be available for maintainers as well. Could you tell us more about that?
I think, this is, I'm not sure it's in the book, but it's in another piece. Andy and I wrote about engineering education and, where we kind of lay out what I just told you about innovation. And one thing that stands out is someone did a study of different kind of frameworks of ethics. And one of them is a kind of framework of care and caregiving. And the person who did the study found that framework appealed more to women and appealed more to racial and ethnic minorities, especially including Latinos here in the States. And so, I mean, when it comes to, like I said, how we, focus on robot competitions and the Elon Musks of the worlds and that kind of stuff when it comes to STEM, I think if we focused more on taking care of the world, which is frankly what a lot of engineers are doing in their lives, that would just appeal to a whole different set of people, right? It would be a kind of road into engineering and other fields that would be more appealing to other kinds of individuals. So I think that's important. Actually, it actually first of all, it's more honest. It's actually reflects reality better, but it also has the advantage of opening up the field.
For sure. Yeah, and I think within pharma, I think the risk of that innovator kind of dilemma is, once you've gotten the product approved, after that, it's all down to, the maintainers, the people that manage the supply chain and the packaging and the distribution. And those are absolutely the unsung kind of heroes within the space. I mean, I often think of that as a pharma challenge, but as you kind of highlight, this is true everywhere, right? The new products get a lot more attention than the old ones.
Well, something Andy and I have been talking about recently since the book came out is, there's so much to say about how the book connects to the pandemic and everyone's experience during it, whether it's essential workers and supply chains and all this stuff. But, everyone's talking about, or many people anyway, are holding out hope that a vaccine will be out sooner than later and will play some role in helping us get beyond this moment. Well, the reality is the only reason we're able to have that hope is because we've already developed capacity around getting vaccines out there. So sure, it's an innovation in some sense, but it's also about this enormous system that we've built that includes things like refrigerators and cold supply chains and this kind of stuff, right? And so that's kind of the incrementalist and maintainers kind of vision we have of these kinds of industries, is that it's only this enormous capacity of thousands of individuals and researchers and all these people bringing this capacity to bear on a problem that allows us to have this hope in the first place. If we're trying to develop vaccines from scratch, like we were after World War II or whatever, we would be we'd be up a creek right now. So, yeah.
Although one might argue that membership of WHO and others is part of that maintainer's kind of mindset that systems that you don't need most years are important for when you might.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah.
Andy and I differ with our president on this issue. Yeah, that's true.
Oh, that feels tempting to dive into, but I think there's a very good argument for whether the WHO was doing its job with the kind of maintenance of of the systems that were important there. So, for sure. And something else you kind of touch on in the book is this idea of productivity, which is, I guess, linked into this. Do you have working definitions of productivity that you think would be useful to us going forwards?
You want to take that one? I know you spent a little bit more time on productivity definition.
Yeah, I mean, I use a pretty traditional definition of productivity when I'm talking about these issues of just like input versus output, right? And so the question is like, what innovation gains, allow us to do less work for more output. And the reason that, the reason I feel like it's important to talk about productivity in the book is because part of the question is, why did we become so obsessed with innovation and technological change over the last 150 years? And it's because we have introduced all these technologies, whether it's railroads and automobiles and, phones and these things that have allowed us to do more with less. And it also, fitting our, historians of standards hats and these kinds of things, it's also where you see the incrementalist vision being so important. It's a bunch of engineers and other workers just slightly improving things over decades and decades that gets us all these gains.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, and Matt Ridley, who was on the podcast a little while back, talks to that kind of incrementalist role in improving energy output and pharmaceutical output and so forth. So,
yeah, we have a more positive vision of government than Ridley does, but but we actually, we like that incrementalist part of his book. Actually, is right on. We're in total agreement there. Yeah.
Absolutely. So just in the final few minutes to sort of come back to healthcare, I think that, there's some clear warning signs in the book for the way that we approach that in pharma. I think 99% of the spend in R&D goes to reactive healthcare, treating things that are broken instead of preventive healthcare. We see the U.S. healthcare system kind of expanding and almost, exploding under its own weight because of some of that same spend. Do you have particular healthcare examples that you would point to as reinforcements for your philosophy?
I mean, we have a couple of things that we'd like to see. You might be disappointed to hear that we haven't come up with a fix for the system, any more than the same policy proposals that are out there about the cost being out of control. But one of the things that you just mentioned about the spend in R&D is, and one of the points we make in the book is the relative neglect of orphan diseases, so-called orphan diseases, which either aren't as high profile or don't afflict as many people. And it would be nice to imagine a system where, and there are some incentives for companies to develop drugs there, but it would be nice to imagine a system that is a little bit more equitable. And I have some sympathy for the companies. They want to go after what gets them the biggest bang for their buck, both financially and in the realm of PR. And in that regard, they're not unlike any of the other large enterprises in other industries, whether it's Google or car companies or whatever. But it would be nice to imagine a way to steer their incentives to reflect just the underlying reality a little bit better and the underlying need of the world's populations. Even if this brushes against the conventional wisdom of investment and public relations and advertising, that would be my hope at a kind of broad abstract level.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that everyone knows the U.S. healthcare system is broken. This is not news. And I think that part of it, the way our insurance is structured, it's very hard to get covered for preventive medicine. And that means there's also not, there's not necessarily drugs kind of developed out along that line. So, and I don't know if this is still true. I know for a long time, like the best studies of preventive medicine were coming out of Scandinavia because they have different incentive structures there. So I think that should be part of reform is thinking about how to move farther in that direction so we don't have to just deal with crisis. And I think on the the kind of innovation maintenance side of on the drug development, and Mike, this is something you will know about way more than Andy and me, but like so many of the kind of incentives right now are to like do little tweaks to drugs to like keep them under IP basically, right? And I think that just sets up the wrong incentives for the industry so that they're putting like literal like human brain power into that as opposed to something more productive and socially beneficial. So I think anything that we can do to kind of reform policy so that that's not happening anymore would be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right. I think something that we know to be true is that the insurance system tends to, especially in the United States, prefer to fix the problem once it's happened rather than to prevent it. Insurance spends no money on preventing disease in many cases, other than statins and a few other sort of preventive things. And I guess the same is true for house insurance and car insurance and a bunch of other things. Tend not to pay for the for maintenance, and therefore the dollars flow in that direction. So, I mean, you have in the book this kind of manifesto for how things could get better. Do you want to in the last couple of minutes kind of talk us through that kind of vision for maintenance future?
I mean, we can both kind of take a swat of this. I just want to say, like, there's a couple different ways you can end a book like this, and we decided not to do like the bullet list of kind of policy recommendations for a variety of reasons. But what we are interested in doing is cultivating kind of conversations around these issues in different industries and problem areas. So the maintainers is the group we help run, and we really encourage people to get a hold of us. They can go to themaintainers.org and sign up for our email list, or just drop us emails and talk about potential projects and stuff people want to look into. We're always looking for collaboration. So Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, two things. I mean, one is on the last discussion about incentives, and especially for preventive maintenance. I think this is where the structure that we've used about trying to link different scales can really help, because there are examples of businesses, like I was telling you, emergency repairs will cost several hundred times more than preventive maintenance. So, I mean, these are just facts. If you move them from context, the numbers will shift, but the principles don't. And you don't even need those contexts. We understand this intuitively through diet, exercise, and those sorts of things in our personal lives. So in a way, I think what we're asking people to do is just to think a little bit more systematically and holistically, and connect these different facets of our experience that might bump into these concepts, innovation and maintenance. The other thing that I would add to what Lee said is that we do see a lot of nonpartisan or bipartisan, however you want to frame it, potential with this concept. Conservatives, by definition, are maintainers in a cultural sense, at least, because conservation and maintenance are synonyms. And progressives also, I think, have a lot to win from adopting more of a maintenance mindset, because it can help them achieve their goals in a way that just going on and on about innovation might not be so productive. So in a way, it's kind of nice that maintenance provides some space, I think, for people to connect through conversation, through discussing what's really important to them. What do you want to preserve in your life, in your community, in a way that other political discussions or even technological discussions, that space seems to have been squeezed out for various reasons.
Yeah, and it certainly feels like a place where we can all agree that this is a healthier use of resource and mental resource. And it's interesting how many times this has come up. I mean, you look at Safi Bakul's artists and soldiers kind of belief about cultures need both to succeed. So so thank you both for taking what could have been a much longer run if I had my time. How can people find out more about you? And you mentioned maintainers.org. How else can they find about you and the book?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at STS_news, and people can just write me on Gmail. It's Lee Vinsel, my last name, at Gmail. Andy?
Yeah, I'm also on Twitter at Russell Prof, PROF, and A Russell at arussell.org is my email address, and the book's at prh.com/Innovation Delusion.
Nice. And last thing, book recommendations. So anything that you think we should be reading that's relevant or completely unrelated?
I've been reading Adam Tooze's book Crashed, about the 2008 financial crisis. He's become a big commentator on our current economic woes under COVID. So it's a good time to revisit that book.
I've been reading Outbreak by Tim Litton, who's a legal scholar. It's about foodborne illness, and it's not, doesn't exactly soothe the nerves in this environment, but in thinking about contagions and in really complex structures that we've built to keep them under wraps, it's really terrific.
Excellent. Thank you both. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
On the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.